And now on the line is Steve Bradley. Steve is the chair of North Western Rail Lobby Group Into the West. Steve, welcome back to Near FM.
Hi, Darren.
Okay, Steve, I last spoke to you on Near FM nearly 6 months ago. What encouraged me to get in touch with you today for this interview we are doing is that I read the article on the journal.ie on Tuesday about the latest news with the All Ireland Strategic Rail Review. As this is our first interview on Near FM in nearly 6 months, Steve, can you remind our listeners, for those who don't know, about who Into the West are and the overall context of our railway network on the island of Ireland in general?
Okay, so Into the West, we're the real lobby for the northwest corner of the island. So we cover the counties Derry, Donegal, Tyrone and Fermanagh. Anybody who has seen, hopefully on social media, there's a map that goes around a lot of the rail network on the island. And there's a massive hole in the northwest corner. There's 5 counties on the island that don't have rail. They're all in Ulster, and they're all around the border counties. They're Donegal, Tyrone and Fermanagh, which are in our patch, and also Cavan and Monaghan. So we talk about the gap in the map. It's very clear when you look at the railway network on the island. You would think nobody lived in the northwest of the island because there's basically no rail infrastructure there. And I should point out as well, that's echoed as well in the poor road infrastructure too. So Into the West began nearly 20 years ago, initially focused on Derry City because at the time there was a danger it would lose its rail entirely. And then since then it's grown out, as I mentioned, to cover the 4 northwestern counties. So we've been lobbying for rail to be restored and improved across that entire region for quite a few years now. And in 2021, so in April 2021, the governments north and south of the border instituted what was called the All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review process. And that was to take a long-term strategic look at what rail we currently have on the island and what we should have moving forward over the next 20, 30 years. The good news is that process is now finished. The review is done. There's been a few leaks about what's potentially in there. There's been winks and nudges given to groups like ourselves. But the hurdle we're at now, and it's something that Eamon Ryan was mentioning in the journal.ie on Tuesday, is the absence of an executive in the north. That means there's nobody there to sign it off north of the border, which means technically it can't be published.
Okay, and there was a coalition formed in recent months across the island of Ireland. Can you tell our listeners more about this, Steve?
Yeah, so Into the West, we teamed up with 8 other rail groups right across the island, covering 26 different counties north and south, including all the counties in Northern Ireland. So it included groups like Dublin Commuter Coalition, Cork Commuter Coalition, West on Track, who are looking to get the Western Rail Corridor reopened, South East on Track, North Tipperary Commuter Coalition, Portadown Armagh Rail Society, Circle Line Belfast. Quite a group of the main rail campaigners on the island. And we wrote to the key decision makers north and south about the fact that the All Ireland Rail Review is done, but has been held up by the lack of a Stormont minister. Your listeners may remember that Stormont was down for 3 years between 2017 and 2020. It's been down for almost a year now. We can't leave the All Ireland Rail Review gathering dust on a shelf just because there's no minister in the north. It's too important to document. Councils need to start planning. Councils need to start looking at where physically will rail lines be reopened in their area, where would stations be located. Development plans are being made, decisions are being taken. It's really important that this information is out in the public and everybody can start planning accordingly. So ourselves and the 8 other groups, we all wrote to Eamon Ryan and to decision makers in the north, and we said if there's still no government in place in the north, we said by April, that there should be an alternative route to publication should be determined. So since then, we've had a couple of responses on that, which suggests that there is a way they can get it out. But formal publication of the document will still require, at the moment, a minister, although people like Eamon Ryan are looking at ways around that.
Yeah. Yeah, and the article on the journal.ie on Tuesday was saying that, as just what you're saying there could be an avenue for Eamon Ryan to publish it. Like, am I right in saying that my impression from reading that article is that over the next few months we'll know what's in the report, probably, but it just won't have been formally kind of launched? Is that the case, do you think?
That's our reading of the situation. So the permanent secretary who runs the infrastructure department in the north, so that's the person who's, they say, in the absence of an infrastructure minister in NI, that's the person who's in charge of it. She responded to our joint letter, and it was very interesting. What she said is, if a strategic environmental assessment is needed, and you would assume that a project of this size in reopening railway lines would need some sort of environmental assessment to look at its impact. If that environmental assessment is needed, then it has to go to public consultation. And if that happens, you have to then publish a draft of the review, because if you're asking people to comment on it publicly, then they need to know what's in there. So our reading is that at some point, probably over the summer, we would expect that if there's no executive in the north, that the draft version of the report will be published under the guise of getting feedback on it from an environmental perspective. And that means we'll at least know what's in there and people can start planning accordingly. And then the formal finished version, taking into account any feedback on that environmental assessment consultation, would then be done later in the year. But at least if everybody knows what's in there, so the public know the public. Bear in mind there are 8,000 contributions from the public to the consultation on the All-Ireland Rail Review. You know, those people deserve to know what's in there. You know, they put their time and effort in. There's community groups, there's councils, there's campaign groups. Those people really need to know what impact their contributions have had and whether or not they've been listened to. So hopefully we'll all get to hear that over the summer in draft form, if not in the full published form.
Yeah, it's very important that Stormont and the Northern Ireland Executive get back in place. I could be wrong, Steve, but I just first of all, I know one of the people, yourselves and the 8 other campaign groups contacted was the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. I could be wrong, but I would personally not be hugely optimistic that the British government will give a lot of money for new railway lines in Northern Ireland anytime soon, bearing in mind that the British economy is not going well. But if Stormont and the Northern Ireland Executive are up and running anytime soon, like who knows what will happen? Would you agree with that, Steve?
I wouldn't be so pessimistic. Now, there's always, governments always have money. There's less money now than the British government would like. I mean, that's probably always the case for a government. But, you know, they still have hundreds of billions of pounds to spend publicly. The UK government did its own exercise called the Union Connectivity Review about 2 years ago. It was most famous for this daft notion of a bridge between Northern Ireland and Scotland, which luckily the report then said shouldn't happen. But it also looked at rail connectivity, and it pointed out that the northwest of Northern Ireland was badly served by rail, as were Northern Ireland's airports, etc. And that Union Connectivity Review process has some money attached to it. So there are currently schemes with rail reopenings happening right across Scotland, England and Wales, using money from the Union Connectivity Review. So there's no reason why some of that funding couldn't also come to Northern Ireland. It just can't in the absence of a government and a minister to take the whole thing forward. So there will be some money available from London. And bear in mind, you know, what sounds like a lot of money in an Irish context, like a couple of billion is a lot of money by any measure, certainly in an Irish context. In terms of what the government spends, that is not a lot. I mean, they're spending upwards of 100 billion on HS2 on one single rail route, which they keep dithering about. So I would be hopeful there'll be some money from London. Then there's also, obviously, the Republic. If you're going to connect Donegal to Dublin by rail, so to Letterkenny, you're going to have to do that through the north. So you're going to have a line starting in Letterkenny, coming through Derry, Strabane, and Ghana, and then picking up the Dublin railway line from there. So we would hope that the southern government would contribute as well. And bear in mind, the south has set aside 35 billion for infrastructure between now and 2030, so it certainly has the money. And as we know, the public accounts are doing very well in the Republic. The tax take is up every year beyond what's expected, so there is money in the south for that. We would hope the EU will also contribute to the Donegal leg of rail reopenings. As your listeners may know, the northern and western region of the Republic was downgraded by the EU. It's now no longer considered to be a developed region. It's considered to be in transition. So for the first time in 20 years, Ireland is not considered a developed country by the EU, and that's the real matter. And one of the ways to improve that is to improve infrastructure. Good news about downgrading is that it brings extra funding to the EU, so we would hope it would contribute well to keep certainly in Donegal. The idea end, but Donegal, letting up to Dublin areas have to come obviously an important issue. Where will the money come from? But I would be confident that we can get some from London. I would be hopeful we can get the Republic to contribute certainly to the Donegal bit as well, if not also to some of the connecting bits through the north as well.